Shalom. I'm Dr. Victoria Sarvati, and I'm here to talk to you about Candid treasures. And today we're going to be talking about the Reformation. This is a very interesting topic because it follows a time in the church when it was very dark and very erroneous as far as its the practice of the faith compared to the first century halakha or way that Yeshua taught us to pray and to practice our faith. When you think about even today what the church has become and the permutations that have gone on since the first century, we see that it's still pretty far off from the faith of Yeshua of that first century. And so we're working to get back through ministries such as this one to understand the faith of Yeshua and how he lived his faith out, and how can we imitate that and put that into our lifestyle. But what we have to remember, in the first century, pretty much the entire spectrum of the people that were following Yeshua's faith were Jewish. And it wasn't until toward the end of the first century that the church reached out into the Gentile nations. You got to remember, at the time, all the Gentile nations were pagans. They were practicing paganism. And the one true faith of God that was understood through Yeshua and revealed through the Messiah was not yet into the nations. And it was only Israel's God that was the one true God. So Israel, the Jewish people, shared their gods with the nations. That's just exactly what Jesus said to do, to go into all nations and to preach the good news to those who are far off, us and the nations who were actually doing horrible things to appease the gods like Tammuz and Baal and Molech and of the like. So what happened? It wasn't until the 4th century that the emperor, Constantine the Great, had somewhat of a conversion to the faith. He did not appreciate the Jewish people and didn't like the idea of Judaism, so there was some integration of the paganism that he practiced as polytheism into the faith. And we see now, at that point in time, what is known as Catholicism developed as, again, still a far cry from that first century expression of the faith of Yeshua. We see this going to the point of selling indulgences and saying our fathers, being absolved from sin by paying a certain price. Things that really don't even add up to the same type of faith that Yeshua actually practiced in that first century. So what happened? It was a combination of a lot of things, but it was this integration of the Roman thought, and it was really anti-Jewish in a lot of ways. The faith was totally de-Judaized. Constantine got rid of the feast of the Lord, the one that Yeshua loved to celebrate, which was Passover, and all the other feasts that are involved in Leviticus 23, as well as the Sabbath, changing the Sabbath to the first day of the week. So we see all these permutations, and then the church entered in what is called the Dark Ages. The Crusades began, and the church had campaigns to go out and kill the infidel, the Muslim, the Jew, anything that didn't line up to the Christian idea or their Christian idea of what the faith should be. The church was so dark that eventually a plague consumed the continent, and about 1/3 of the people died. So we see a judgment that was put there on the church. Then the Reformation happens in the 1500s. Martin Luther comes on the scene, and we begin to see the church turn around because he had this revelation of, we're saved by grace through faith. It's not of our works. We don't have to climb the steps and make our knees bleed or beat ourselves up or say the Our Fathers a million times. We just need to receive by grace and faith the grace of God in our life. At that same time, in the 1500s, we see that John Calvin had the revelation of the communion being doesn't change in a substantiation to the real cannibalistic idea of the becoming Jesus' flesh and blood, but it was a covenant meal that comes from Passover. We see in the 1600s where John Wesley and Charles Wesley had the understanding of grace, or understanding of holiness and sanctification into the faith. We see John Smith understanding baptism, and that we're not baptized into the church, but we're baptized into Christ with a testimony. And it's our decision. It's not something that a baby doesn't decide and becomes a Christian. It's when one decides and identifies with God in the baptism of remission of sins. Then we go on to the 1920s, where there's the Azusa Revival, and William Seymour leads the church into a brand new phase of the faith with power, where the Holy Spirit is now functioning throughout the body, and people are being healed and delivered, and there's so many wonderful things happening that can only be done by the Spirit of God. But then we come to the 1990s, and many people are understanding that there's the faith of Yeshua, that Jewish faith that is interpreted through his teachings, but we have to understand it through a Hebraic mindset. And many of us are learning Hebrew, or we're learning the culture and the traditions and the ways of that first century so that we can understand our Jewish Lord better. So I hope this little snippet helps you understand the permutation of the church, that we sort of had a spiritual amnesia and we're waking up to the Jewish roots of our faith. God bless you and shalom.